Ethan opened the small velvet box he had hidden for months, imagining the moment he would finally ask Emily to marry him. He thought this weekend would mark the happiest chapter of their 3-year relationship. But just a few hours before the proposal, his phone lit up with a photo he was never meant to see. Emily and her family were smiling on a luxury beach in the Maldives, drinks in hand, looking anything but the financially devastated, hospital-burdened people he had been helping. A cold, sinking feeling spread through his chest as the pieces began to shift in his mind. The timelines didn't match. The stories didn't match. And for the first time, Ethan felt an unfamiliar fear whispering beneath the surface. What if the woman he was about to propose to had been lying to him all along? It all began on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Emily showed up at Ethan's apartment, eyes swollen, hands trembling, and a stack of medical papers clutched to her chest. She collapsed onto the couch before he could even ask what was wrong. Between shaky breaths, she told him she had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that required an experimental treatment not covered by insurance. Her voice cracked as she explained that the hospital demanded immediate payment to keep her on the treatment list. Ethan felt his world tilt as he read through the papers she handed him. There were charts, signatures, medical codes, even a breakdown of hospital fees that looked official enough to make his stomach twist. He held her hand as she cried, telling him that her parents had already taken out a second mortgage on their house and were drowning in debt because of medical bills. She said they couldn't handle any more financial pressure, and she didn't want to burden them further. The moment she whispered, "I don't know what to do anymore," Ethan felt something inside him break. He had never seen her so fragile, so defeated. Every instinct told him he needed to protect her, to fix this, to make the pain go away. She kept insisting she didn't want to ask him for help, that she hated herself for even bringing it up, and that she would understand if this was too much for him. That only strengthened his resolve. He told her she wasn't alone, and that they would get through this together. Emily cried harder and buried her face in his chest, thanking him over and over as if she were already preparing to say goodbye. For the next few days, Ethan barely slept as he researched the supposed condition she had described. Everything he read sounded terrifying, enough to make him fear losing her. The urgency she described felt real, pressing, impossible to ignore. When she sent him a message late at night saying the hospital needed at least a partial payment before the weekend, or she would lose her spot in the trial, Ethan didn't hesitate anymore. He wired her $50,000, telling himself that love sometimes demanded sacrifice. He imagined the relief she would feel, the gratitude, even the hope that maybe this nightmare was finally turning around. Emily responded with a flood of messages thanking him, calling him her hero, saying he had saved her life. Her parents sent long, emotional texts too, telling him he was like a son to them and promising they would pay him back once they got back on their feet. Over the following weeks, Emily kept him updated with vague descriptions of side effects, hospital visits, and doctor consultations. She claimed she was exhausted, constantly in pain, and overwhelmed by the stress of the treatment. Ethan delivered meals, cleaned her apartment, and stayed by her side whenever she asked him to. He believed every word she said, every tear she shed, and every promise she whispered. He had no reason to doubt her. Not yet. It started with a single photo Ethan wasn't supposed to see. He had been scrolling absent-mindedly through his social feed during lunch when a mutual friend's post flashed on the screen. There, unmistakably, stood Emily and her parents on a sun-drenched beach in the Maldives, holding tropical drinks and smiling as if life had never been kinder to them. The caption read, "Family getaway, much-needed break." Ethan froze. The timestamp on the photo made his stomach tighten. It had been taken just days after he transferred the $50,000 to help cover Emily's urgent medical expenses. His mind raced as he stared at the image again and again, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Emily had told him She was bedridden, exhausted, and barely able to stand because of the side effects of the experimental treatment. Her parents had texted him long emotional messages about losing sleep, struggling with debt, and being overwhelmed by stress. There was no sign of stress in that picture. No sign of illness. Nothing but luxury and celebration. For the first time, a small doubt cracked through Ethan's trust, but he tried to push it away. Maybe the photo was old. Maybe a friend tagged them incorrectly. Maybe there was an explanation, he just didn't know yet. Still, anxiety gnawed at him. That evening, when he called Emily to check in, she told him she had been in bed all day with severe nausea from the treatment. Her voice trembled exactly the way he had heard many times before. But now, those tremors sounded practiced. Rehearsed. The next morning, unable to quiet the unease, Ethan called the hospital Emily claimed she was receiving treatment from. He simply asked for confirmation of her upcoming appointment. The nurse on the phone hesitated, tapped a keyboard, and told him the hospital had no patient under her name receiving any form of experimental therapy. There were no outstanding bills. No scheduled visits. No record whatsoever. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He asked about the medical trial number listed on the documents Emily had shown him. The nurse replied gently, almost apologetically, that the code he gave wasn't a trial at all. It was a generic template number used in sample paperwork for medical students. His fingers went cold. He hung up and stared at the wall in silence. Something was very wrong. Determined to get clarity, he drove to the county office to check the supposed second mortgage Emily had mentioned. A clerk printed the public records within minutes. There had never been a second mortgage filed under her parents' names. Not last month. Not ever. Ethan remembered the shaky signatures on the documents Emily had shown him. He remembered how she cried when she handed them to him. How she clung to him. How he rushed into action. He pulled the documents from his desk drawer when he got home and looked at them again, not with love or sympathy, but with suspicion. For the first time, the details struck him as off. The misspelled words. The inconsistent formatting. The blurry stamps. Things he had overlooked because he trusted her completely. As the evidence stacked higher in his mind, the truth became impossible to ignore. The illness was a lie. The debt was a lie. The treatment was a lie. And the woman he planned to marry might never have been the person he believed she was. Ethan confronted Emily the following evening, the printed hospital records and mortgage documents laid out on the table between them. He expected shock or confusion, maybe even guilt, but Emily's first reaction was anger. Her face twisted as she demanded to know why he had gone behind her back. When he calmly explained what he had found, her expression snapped into fear, then into tears, then into fury again, shifting so quickly it left him dizzy. She accused him of not trusting her, of being paranoid, of invading her privacy. When he showed her the Maldives photo, she insisted it was edited. When he mentioned the nurse's confirmation, she claimed the hospital had made a mistake. When he pointed out the fake mortgage paperwork, she said he didn't understand how emergency financial procedures worked. Nothing she said made sense anymore. Her stories tangled together, contradicting themselves with every breath. At one point, she slammed the papers off the table and cried that he was trying to ruin her life out of jealousy. Ethan kept his voice calm, asking only for the truth. That was when she changed tactics. Her tone softened. She reached for his hands, eyes wide, saying she panicked during her illness, that she had exaggerated a few things, but only because she needed help. She begged him not to abandon her. For a moment, Ethan felt the familiar tug of sympathy, but the evidence was too overwhelming now. When he gently told her he needed honesty, she exploded again, shouting loud enough for neighbors to hear. Minutes later, her parents stormed into the apartment, already furious, already blaming him. They claimed he was manipulating their daughter. They accused him of fabricating the documents to frame her. Her mother called him a monster. Her father threatened to handle it legally. Ethan tried to show them the evidence, but they refused to look. Her father snatched a paper from the floor, crumpled it, and threw it back at him. By the next morning, the situation escalated even further. Emily posted a vague but damaging status online, implying Ethan was emotionally abusive and controlling. Several people reached out to him in confusion. Others began messaging, Emily offering support. Her parents sent emails to Ethan's workplace claiming he was unstable and dangerous. The HR department contacted him for a meeting, embarrassed but obligated to follow protocol. Emily started calling him repeatedly throughout the day, oscillating between screaming, sobbing, and begging him to drop everything and come over. When he stopped responding, her messages grew darker. She claimed she would expose him. She threatened to ruin his reputation. Her parents began showing up outside his apartment at odd hours, pounding on the door until neighbors complained. One night, her father stood in the parking lot yelling that Ethan would regret doing this to their family. It became clear this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't a moment of panic or a single mistake. It was a coordinated attempt to intimidate him, silence him, and flip the narrative before he could act. Staring at the chaos that had overtaken his life, Ethan realized something chilling. The lies had only been the beginning. Now that their deception was threatened, Emily and her family were willing to destroy him to protect themselves. Ethan realized he couldn't handle the situation alone anymore. The lies, the threats, the harassment at his workplace, it had crossed every line imaginable. The following morning, he walked into a law office with a folder full of printed evidence, his hands still shaking from the chaos of the past week. The attorney, a calm and sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Mills, listened without interrupting as he laid out everything. The fake medical documents, the non-existent mortgage, the Maldives trip, the bullying from Emily's family. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and said quietly that he had more than enough grounds to file a lawsuit for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest, replaced by a new kind of fear, one tied to the reality that this was no longer a relationship problem, but a criminal one. Catherine helped him draft the complaint, outlining every documented lie, every false claim, and every piece of forged paperwork Emily had given him. She instructed him to block all contact from Emily and her parents, advising him to keep records of any attempt they made to reach out or intimidate him. Within 24 hours, Emily's family somehow learned he had spoken to a lawyer. The escalation was immediate. Emily sent dozens of frantic messages, begging him to meet her before he made a mistake. Her mother emailed him long paragraphs, accusing him of trying to destroy their family for revenge. Her father left threatening voicemails, saying he would fight dirty if Ethan dared to take legal action. Catherine told him to save every message, every voicemail, every threat. They became part of the evidence file. A few days later, the lawsuit was officially filed against Emily and both her parents. The effect was seismic. Suddenly, the confident, aggressive family turned desperate and erratic. They showed up outside Ethan's apartment again, this time pleading instead of yelling. When he refused to come out, their tone flipped instantly, accusing him of lying and promising they would expose him. Catherine instructed him not to engage at all, reminding him that everything needed to stay documented. Ethan followed her advice, even when the situation became unbearable. One evening, he returned home to find his car keyed, and a note stuffed under the windshield wiper telling him to stop the legal nonsense. He forwarded everything to his attorney, and she contacted the police to begin a vandalism report. Meanwhile, she kept digging deeper into the documents Emily had provided. It wasn't long before Catherine uncovered even more inconsistencies. The forged medical forms Emily had shown Ethan contained metadata linking them to a generic template downloaded from a public website. The supposed signatures from doctors did not match any licensed physicians in the state. And the audio recordings Ethan provided, moments he had captured when Emily vaguely admitted she didn't want to get in trouble for how this started, became a devastating piece of evidence. Catherine warned Ethan that Emily and her family would likely try to settle things privately or intimidate him into backing down. She was right. The next day, Emily emailed him a long message offering to resolve things without the courts, claiming everything had spiraled out of control and that he was overreacting. He didn't reply. Catherine prepared the next legal step, explaining that given the fraudulent documents, the manipulative behavior, and the financial damages, the case might shift from civil to criminal prosecution. For the first time since everything began, Ethan felt like he wasn't powerless anymore. He had a plan. He had protection. And the truth was finally starting to close in on the people who had tried to ruin him. The courtroom was colder than Ethan expected, the kind of cold that made every sound echo just a little too sharply. He sat beside Catherine as Emily and her parents entered, their faces tight with anxiety, their movements stiff and defensive. There was no trace of the confidence they had displayed when they were threatening him outside his apartment. Now they looked cornered. When the judge called the session to order, Catherine stood and presented the first packet of evidence, the forged medical documents. She laid the originals beside the metadata analysis, explaining how the files had been created from online templates and altered with mismatched signatures. Emily's father shifted uncomfortably. Her mother kept her eyes glued to the table. Then came the printouts of the Maldives photos, complete with timestamps pulled directly from the image data. The judge raised an eyebrow as Catherine calmly described how the trip coincided exactly with the week Emily claimed she had been hospitalized and suffering severe side effects. Emily opened her mouth to object, but her attorney stopped her with a hand on her arm. Next came the text messages. The ones where Emily hinted at needing urgent funds, the ones where she thanked Ethan for saving her life, and the especially damning ones where she joked about dealing with things later. Catherine read each one aloud, her voice steady and precise. The courtroom was silent, except for the turning of paper. Then Ethan watched as Catherine played the short audio clip he had recorded, the moment Emily admitted she never wanted this to become a legal issue, that things had snowballed, and that she wished he wouldn't look too closely at the paperwork. Emily visibly paled. Her father's jaw tightened. Her mother whispered something frantically to their attorney. But the worst blow came when Catherine presented the public records, proving there had been no second mortgage, despite Emily's emotional claims. The judge asked Emily's attorney if they wished to dispute the documents. The attorney hesitated. Then, in a shaky voice, he requested a recess to reassess the presented evidence. The judge denied it. He wanted answers now. That was when everything began to unravel. Under pressure, Emily's father accidentally contradicted himself twice while attempting to explain the financial strain they had mentioned. Her mother tried to recover by adding details that didn't match Emily's earlier statements. The judge noticed immediately. Their attorney tried to guide them, but the more they spoke, the deeper they sank into inconsistencies. Finally, the judge turned to Emily directly and asked if she had fabricated the medical documents. There was a long, trembling silence. Emily stared at the table, lips pressed tight, then whispered that she had edited a few things to make them clearer. The judge asked if editing meant creating fraudulent documents. Emily broke. She began crying, shaking, stumbling over half-explanations and excuses that contradicted everything she had said before. Her parents sat frozen as her confession spilled out in fragments. When she finished, the judge ordered an emergency no-contact order and noted that the volume of evidence warranted escalation toward criminal proceedings. He instructed that the case would move forward without delay. As the gavel struck, Emily's mother let out a choked sound, and her father buried his face in his hands. Ethan didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, the first deep breath he had taken in weeks. The truth was finally out. The facade had shattered. And for the first time, they could no longer twist the story to make him the villain. In the weeks following the initial hearing, everything began unraveling faster than Ethan could have imagined. Catherine continued gathering documents, and the investigators assigned to the case requested access to Emily's digital files. What they found only deepened the severity of the accusations. Buried in her emails was a chain of messages from years earlier, involving another man she had dated before Ethan. In those messages, she had used almost identical wording, claims of sudden illness, emergency treatments, and overdue medical bills. The investigators traced the transactions and discovered she had convinced that former boyfriend to send her $30,000. The pattern was unmistakable. It wasn't a misunderstanding or one-time mistake. It was a method, a tactic she had used before. When Catherine presented the findings to the prosecutor's office, the case shifted from a civil lawsuit to a potential criminal fraud case. Emily's family began panicking. Their calls to the court grew frantic, filled with attempts to negotiate or halt the process. Their own attorney withdrew representation after several missed payments, and after reviewing the evidence stacked against them. They contacted multiple law firms, but most refused after seeing the forged documents and hearing about the intimidation attempts. Meanwhile, Emily and her parents continued to violate the no-contact order. They left notes on Ethan's door, sent him texts from new numbers, and even attempted to approach him in public. Each violation was reported and added to the growing list of charges. One night, neighbors called the police when Emily's father stood outside the building shouting Ethan's name. He was arrested for harassment and violation of the no-contact order. Shortly after, Emily's mother was caught trespassing on Ethan's apartment property, leaving behind a handwritten letter begging him to end all of this before it destroys their family. The police took her into custody as well. Emily herself was detained days later after attempting to confront Ethan at his workplace parking lot. Her arrest marked the point where the family's defenses finally collapsed. With each of them facing potential criminal charges, they agreed to a settlement meeting arranged by Catherine. The negotiation lasted hours, filled with trembling voices, tearful admissions, and the overwhelming weight of consequences they could no longer deny. In the end, they signed a written confession acknowledging the fraud, the fabricated medical records, the falsified mortgage claims, and the coordinated attempt to deceive Ethan. They agreed to return the full $50,000 he had given them. They also agreed to pay an additional $8,500 to cover his legal fees. The money had to be wired immediately. To make the payment, the family sold off items from their home, cashed out savings, and borrowed from relatives. News of the case spread quickly in their community. Both parents were terminated from their jobs. Their reputations were destroyed. Friends distanced themselves. Extended family cut ties. Emily's former boyfriend contacted Catherine's office shortly afterward, requesting information so he could move forward with his own case against them. The pattern of deception had finally caught up with them, and there was no way to escape it anymore. Ethan received confirmation that the funds had been transferred. He stared at the receipt for a long time, not with joy, but with relief that the nightmare was finally ending. He stepped outside that evening, feeling the air on his face as if for the first time in months. He was free from the manipulation, free from the fear, free from the life he nearly tied himself to forever. The truth had cost him time, peace, trust, and heartbreak, but it had also saved him. And as he walked toward his car, breathing deeply, he realized he wasn't just reclaiming his money. He was reclaiming his life. When the final paperwork was signed, and the last court appearance concluded, Ethan walked out of the building feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The chaos, the betrayal, and the months of fear no longer clung to him. He finally had space to breathe. Catherine shook his hand and told him he had done the right thing, and for the first time, he genuinely believed it. He realized that seeking the truth hadn't just protected him financially, it had protected his future. He drove home quietly, letting the calm settle in. There were no more threatening messages, no more whispered doubts, no more pressure pulling him in every direction. Just silence and the steady beat of a life finally returning to its own rhythm. That night, he sat by his window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker below. He didn't feel anger anymore, only closure. He promised himself he would move forward slowly, choose differently, and trust his instincts with greater care. The experience had hardened him, but it had also taught him resilience. As he closed the curtains and prepared for bed, he understood one thing clearly. He had survived the worst of it, and everything from here on would be a new beginning.